All right. Well, let's just go ahead and start talking. Um, Talking about disability insurance today in the Backdoor Roth IRA. Always ask this question: what did you do in the last month to ensure the success of your financial future? Lance, what did you do?
Bro, I put my first $1,000 towards my massive student loan debt.
That's awesome. Did you refinance or anything, or just
I
threw it towards it?
I'm still taking advantage of this nice little emergency COVID relief fund. So while it's 0%, I'm just going to keep it where it's at.
Awesome. No, that's good. I mean, paying off debt is a negative bond, essentially. You're just getting a return if you pay it off fully. And I'm sure, that putting that big $1,000 chunk towards it was pretty good.
It felt good. I need a lot more thousands, but yeah.
Well, that's a start. I mean, who knows how long it's going to continue for. I got asked the other day, is going to go till May, like they said. And I was like, I don't know. They always keep changing it. We might get deferred till the end of the year now.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll just leave it there until they put my interest rates in place.
Janice, did you ever figure out that question about the student loans you asked me about consolidating?
No, I never did. I've been so busy on inpatient setting. I honestly put all of that student loan stuff on the back burner because of what you guys are talking about. We don't really have to figure it out until May. But I mean, interest rates are going to be rising, so maybe I should get on it.
No rush. It was just I actually didn't know the answer if you could have a part of it forgiven, and if you sort of could do that before transferring to another custodian. But if you find out an answer, let me know.
Yeah, and honestly, as I think about it, I think all 4 years of medical school were consolidated when I started, basically when I started an income-driven repayment plan. That's what I remember happening now that I think about it. So, but yeah, for people that haven't consolidated yet, maybe a medical student, that could be a good option for them.
For sure, especially to get that fourth year 0% payments, I think.
Yeah.
That is the thing to tell. I don't talk to medical students much anymore, but if you're ever around, that's the first thing I would tell them to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I like it. What did I do? Under contract for our first planned short-term rental here in Nashville. That's exciting. It's out in the Hermitage area. Going to see if the short-term rental thing works out. It's right by the airport, and it's probably about 15 minutes from Broadway. So we're going to try to theme it country music themed. And if that doesn't work, it's right next to TriStar. So put some traveling nurses in it, hopefully. Offered on a duplex in Fayetteville, North Carolina. So that's pending. And then funded my self-directed IRA and did my first 2022 Roth IRA contribution. So disability insurance. And this is a topic that I think everyone tries to avoid and they don't really think about until they have to. But, the reason you need it is because bad shit can happen. And if you stop getting paid, your bills will never stop. And life's a spectrum. It's not just healthy to death. There's a ton of gray area. You get hurt, you get sick with COVID, you develop cancer. There's a lot of reasons you won't be able to work. There's a lot of reasons that it'll prevent you from going back to full speed of getting your income. And when you need it, you don't really think about it. And most people think they're invincible in their early 20s, 30s, and 40s, but that's far from the case. In addition, when your net worth is low, it's when you actually need it in your younger ages versus when you're older, when you're 50 or 60 and you have a higher net worth to cover any of these expenses. And then there's statistics that show that 1 out of 5 doctors will actually use this in their lifetimes. And you spend 10 to 15 years of training, not just doctors, anybody, nurses who train, CRNAs. It's one of those things where you spend all this time training. Why would you sacrifice that for not protecting against your most valuable asset? So the layout of disability insurance works on certain frameworks. And the way to think about it first is the timeline. So you have a benefit period, which is the maximum amount of time the insurance policy pays your benefit. It's the time that the disability program is active for you. There's what's called an elimination period that begins on the date you become disabled and runs until that benefit period. And this period you're not getting paid for. You must wait while being disabled before you're eligible to receive payments. So it's sort of this gap waiting period. There's two types of short-term disability insurances, short-term versus long-term. And short-term, you can see them mostly from employers or group policies. Long-terms are the ones that you go to for the big groups, but short-term replaces a portion of your income sooner and for a shorter period of time, like the name. And it's usually up to maybe only 6-7 months. The run-in time is relatively short, in this example, 8 days, but it really only goes towards about 6-7 months, and it expires, in this case, in April. Whereas long-term disability has a longer elimination period. You're not going to get benefits for 6-7 months, but then it covers you until you're 65, 67, 70, whatever your policy states. So it pays you, they all pay you a weekly benefit just based off different elimination periods. And purchasing short-term rental coverage can be expensive. If your employer offers it, it's not a bad idea, but usually the dogma is to always go with long-term disability insurance, because for short-term disability, you should have emergency funds to cover that short amount of time. And then the question becomes, what's the difference between a group policy versus a private company? A group policy is what you see with your employer, like Vanderbilt, versus private when you go through a broker. The benefits of a group plan is it's super easy to set up. But there's a weaker definition of disability. You can't take it from place to place. It just is with you in that institution. It can be cancelable and changeable by the employer, so they could drop you or change their policies. There's fewer rider options, which we'll talk about. And lacks underwriting. Underwriting means that when they look at your overall health situation, your health history, if you get private insurance, they're stricter. They look at a lot more versus group plans. They just say, I'm sure this person's healthy. Let us, approve them. But there's also a problem with that because it covers less. With private, it's harder to set up. Still pretty easy, though. Stronger definition of disability, which is the most important part of it. You want own occupation, which we'll get into, to protect the occupation you do. You can take it to any employer. Cannot be changed once bound unless you change it. Multiple rider options, which are important. But the underwriting is stricter, and we'll talk about what that means. And here it is. So it's a fancy word for saying someone who uses your medical history to determine your premium and deductible. It's a pre-existing condition, essentially. And a fully underwritten long-term policy will require medical underwriting at the time of application. And these policies are often purchased from an independent broker. This independent broker is usually not employed directly with any insurance carrier. And at the time of the application, they set you up with whatever company you decide. And even before then, they'll just do a preliminary history, and they'll talk to you about what are your medical history, medications you take, surgeries, hobbies, and sometimes even medical records. And they really want to know about high-risk activities. Do you do rock climbing, spelunking, skydiving, playing Wordle? And it may preclude you altogether or make the cost higher, but usually never get precluded altogether. They usually say, we're not going to cover rock climbing accidents or skydiving accidents. And the white coat investor often talks about, if you want to sort of not have them really know about it, you can quit 6 months before and then sign up. But that's sort of some gray area. I think it's probably better to let them know about it and just, have that excluded at that point. For example, there are some ones that they do exclude more than others that I read. Type 1 diabetes gets excluded a lot because they're more likely to be hospitalized. And they can do individual exclusions based off your history. So if you have low back pain, they'll exclude low back pain injuries from there. I was reading if you have OSA with CPAP, it'll depend on your compliance, your diagnosis, your apnea-hypopnea index. Most of these companies aren't that strict, but these are just some stories that they can look into. And common exclusions or limitations that are definite between companies that they don't include are acts of war, active military, normal pregnancy without complications, foreign travel, mental disorders, and medical conditions at the time of policy creation. That goes back to the pre-existing condition. So there's really two ways to claim disability. Presumptive total disability just means the company, won't really argue with you if you get one of these things. You don't have to fill out a lot of paperwork. You don't have to get an attorney. And what it really means is you can't function in one of the major ways: loss of speech, hearing in both ears, sight in both eyes, both hands, feet, one hand and one foot, sort of, you could be like a pirate, and the claims process between your physician and potentially a hired attorney is the other way. And that's more of a labor process. That's really anything outside of the presumptive disability. Could be some paperwork between you, them, and the attorney, but that run-in and elimination period is the period where you get this done. So, do you need short-term, long-term, or both? Well, as I said before, the dogma states you usually only need long-term disability insurance. And short-term policies, they don't have good riders. You may get injured or sick longer than 4 months. And overall, they're just not great plans. If your employer offers it for free, then take it. But a large part of this is you should shop around with these vetted brokers through these companies that have a good history to get yourself a long-term plan that can go with you from employer to employer. So talking about some necessary riders, and what a rider is an attachment to your policy that ensures that you get the coverage you need. True own occupation is the #1 foundation of this. It's intrinsic to all of the private insurance providers, but not necessary to the group policies. And definition states that if you're unable to perform the substantial and material duties of your occupation, you are considered to be totally disabled. And you get paid for that loss of ability, but not for anything else you do. So if your occupation is a surgeon and you can't operate, you're covered. If you're an internal medicine physician and you round on patients and you can't do that, you're covered. Let's say that you're a surgeon, you get a tremor and you can't operate, but you can do medical surveys, telemedicine, and consulting. That doesn't get covered, but you still get the coverage from this. And, it's the most important thing to have, because if you can't do the main job that you do like this, you want to get paid for it until you can get back to that. And the benefit of these strong plans is you can still do other stuff like telemedicine and consulting to make an income, but then you still get compensated for your primary own occupation. So there's variations of this. There's translational own occupation, which your policy will pay you if you cannot work in your own occupation specialty, even if you can work and do things in another field. But if you exceed your previous income in that other field, your monthly benefit from the policy will be lowered and capped. And there's modified own occupation. Your policy will only pay if you can't work in your occupation and specialty, and if you're not working in another field. This is pretty restrictive, this modified own occupation, and I don't recommend it if you can find something that's a translational own occupation. This rider is one you always want to add on, and you receive partial benefits if you endure a loss of 15 to 20% of your earnings due to an injury or illness. So what this does is, if you combine it with the true occupation rider, is you go back to work, but you're not back at full speed, then you still get compensated from the insurance plan. It's the same example with the surgeon if he's not back. And, let's say he gets hit by a truck and he's out fully. He's going to get total coverage for that time period. But when he goes back to work and he can work partially, maybe not, all 100% of the time, and he's lost 20% of that, he'll still get this rider on board for it. And I have this with Guardian. They're actually the only company that says if you're doing an interventional procedure more than 50% of the time and you can't do it, then they will pay you 100% of the benefit. So they're one of the few companies that the partial benefit rider doesn't matter as much in a sense to proceduralists, because they get covered beyond what most do. But a lot of it's still good to have this, but most plans have a weaker definition of full disability, and you always want to have this residual partial benefit behind it in case you start to go back to work and you're not back at 100%. This is the other rider that you must always have, which is called a feature increase rider, and allows you to increase your policy coverage without a health examination. It really removes repeated underwriting, and this is great because they don't look at your health situation again. Once you're locked in, you can raise your monthly coverage without them re-examining you. And all they need is proof of income for this. They don't need to take your medical history again. So a typical resident or student would start at $3,000 to $5,000 a month and increase once they've signed a contract to become an attending or whatever job they have that has a pay increase. And then there's two options behind that, is a future increase option, which is, I think, the best one. It's what I have. And most flexible in that it allows you to increase your benefit any policy anniversary date. So I can't really change mine until my anniversary date, which is in July. But this other one is called a benefit purchase rider, and it offers one increase at the end of each third year. And it actually, you have to jump up by 50% at that third year. And if you don't do it, you lose that rider. So I think that's pretty restrictive, and I wouldn't advise anybody to get that unless they have to. A cost of living adjustment rider called a COLA. So this is really to help you pace with inflation in the event of disability lasting longer than 12 months. And this is important because with everything increasing nowadays, that's pretty much how life goes. Inflation's going up, home prices are going up. If you just lock in at a rate and monthly benefit now, it's not going to hedge with the changes that are happening with the worth of the dollar. So there's an increase in the monthly benefit that occurs as you age, and it's usually to a percentage point, and it takes 1 year after the disability, and it'll start to increase. Most plans set this at 3% increase per year, but that's when inflation was lower. So I'm actually talking to my company now to see if they can raise that slightly. It can be removed later. It's good in your younger years. And this is important with, again, the rising costs of everything. But if you feel that there's any point where this is not as much of a problem, you can drop it at any time or add it on at any time. These are not always riders, the non-cancelable guaranteed renewable. They usually come intrinsic to the major plans. But if you're not going with a major company or they don't spell it out clearly, you need to know these things. So conditionally renewable means the company gets to decide what conditions will be renewed for your policy and at what price. If it says conditionally renewable, I wouldn't do it. If it says guaranteed renewable, that's good. The company can change the premium if they do it for everyone else, but everything is renewed for you. And that rarely happens. And most of them will have the stamp of non-cancelable and guaranteed renewable, which means the company can't change anything unless you change it until it expires. So those were the riders that I recommend after reading The White Coat Investor and talking to brokers and looking through these companies that they're the most recommended. And these potentially unnecessary riders aren't always recommended. You have to look at your personal situation. And really, sometimes they're not even worth it. Just getting a bigger benefit would end up benefiting most. So a student loan rider is something that sounds better than it is. Obviously, if disability happens, it's not going to pay your student loan debt. And this rider may cover that. But it only actually covers certain restrictions. So it only lasts for about 10 to 15 years. You have to have a monthly payment of at least $250. Starts when the policy starts, and it's only paid for the time that the rider is set for. So let's say you start the rider for a 15-year coverage, but you don't get disabled until 10 years of that 15 years. You only have 5 years left of student loan coverage. So it's actually kind of sucks because if you don't get disabled in any of that time period, you didn't really need it. But also if you get disabled towards the end of it, you don't have much of it left. So it's a very restrictive loan rider. The catastrophic disability rider is defined as you need to suffer a complete loss of any one of the following. That's a complete catastrophically disabled situation: speech, hearing in both ears, sight in both eyes, hands, feet. Similar to before, but it has to also prevent you from performing 2 of 6 ADLs without assistance, or have severe cognitive impairment as measured by an acceptable medical test. This is not recommended for most because you could just get a bigger benefit and it's not worth paying for this. And that rider also may be restricted to certain age. They don't give it to you above age 50, and they usually cap the catastrophic benefit. And often the base policy will not allow catastrophic benefit to exceed 3 times the base monthly benefit that you're receiving. So other riders that you may or may not, that should say want, a retirement protection rider carries several benefits in the sense of it replaces contributions made to a retirement plan, but it can be not set up in the best way because sometimes they're set up like an annuity with higher costs. It's an insurance-based investing product, and they don't compensate you correctly for what you would have saved in retirement. So it's not usually recommended to get. Oftentimes there's a lot of fees and just junk associated with it. A lump sum rider also is not advised, as Guardian does do this. They'll pay 35% of all the total partial benefit to you at the age of 60 all at once, so you can have that for retirement. And this is an example of that from their website. If you're healthy and working and disability strikes, then you have benefits until 65 here on a normal plan. But if you get their lump sum rider, excuse me, you get disabled, then you get a smaller benefit per month in this lump sum at 60, which really ends up being that you should have just saved that total all along. And at that point, it just doesn't make much of a difference because you could have dropped it anyways then. So these are the recommended riders based off the White Coat Investor. And as we talked about, specialty specific is the #1 mandatory own occupation. That's why you go with long-term through a good broker to get this for any specialty we do. Guaranteed renewable has to be mandatory in there. Make sure like have the verbiage in there. Non-cancelable, same thing. Partial and residual is mandatory too, and I agree with that because you go back to work in phases and you can still want to get paid for not working like 100% of effort. Future purchase option I think is great, especially when you're in those early earning years and training, so you can escalate it without underwriting again. Let's take some water. Cost of living adjustment I think is awesome too, just because of where we are in the current situation right now. And these don't really worry about retirement or catastrophic, just buy a larger base benefit plan. So should you buy these riders? Again, no, just buy a larger base benefit plan. Then buy those good riders. So how much disability insurance do you need? Well, always buy enough to cover both your living expenses and retirement savings. Payouts are usually tax-free. And the rule of thumb is for a resident, fellow, trainee, $3,000 to $7,000 per month, and attending $10,000 to $15,000 per month. So it's usually tax-free money, as I mentioned, and you always want to look at what your expenses are and really think about what are you spending per month that will also go towards your cost of living and what you would normally contribute to retirement. Disability insurance can be expensive, and that you're paying for what you get, and you should expect to pay 2% to 6% of your benefit per month for that security. There's two types of thoughts on this, graded versus premium, and what this means is this is how you pay them. So graded premium charges you less in the first few years of the policy and escalates over time. So as you age from like 30s, 40s, 50s, every year the payment will go up as you age. And this is due to you more likely being having to get disabled later in your life than early. This can be beneficial in a lot of ways, I think, to do graded because you're paying a little bit less earlier on. If you hit FI early, you can drop the plan. If your net worth goes up enough to where you don't need disability insurance anymore, you can drop the plan. So overall, graded is a good thought, but it can get expensive if you let it go for too long. If you let, compared to level, which stays the same rate throughout the entire life of the policy, if you plan to keep this into your 50s and 60s, the graded premiums will be super high per month and per year. So you're going to really have to weigh out how long you want to keep this. And this is just an example of a graded step premium goes up over time while a level premium stays the same. So when you're shopping around for disability insurance, there's only really 6 companies that do this right, that have the best definition of it. Principal, Guardian, Ohio Financial, Emeritus, The Standard, and Mass Mutual. Northwestern was just taken out of this recently, I think because they didn't have a good definition of disability, it turned out. But these are the ones that the White Coat Investor recommends, and you don't go to these companies directly. You should never go to these companies directly. You go through an individual broker. So you go through referrals to get to these brokers, and there's a lot of great ones on the White Coat Investors sites. They work with you. You don't pay them. Whatever company you go with pays them, and they're completely unbiased because they're representing all 6 of them. So they'll create graphs for you and Excel files showing you the differences between all 6 of them. And what you should do is bring your group policy to the meeting whatever your employer has so they could see what you're missing from that and what you need. And you need to also bring to them your individual situation, how much should be replaced per month. What are you and your significant other spending per month? And if a catastrophe happens, what needs to be replaced? So they need to look at your W-2s, or you need to look at your W-2s. They don't really look at it. I forget if they verify it or not, but you just need to know what you're spending and what needs to be replaced. And compare rates and premiums. You don't want to settle for one. Compare all of them. Compare all their definitions. They're not all going to be perfect, but go with the one you feel the strongest about, and you can feel the best about paying. I went with Bob Biani with Dr. Disability Quotes, and they did a great job. I ended up settling with Guardian, and I'll show you my policy in a little bit. And I signed up for this about 3 years ago. So it's been pretty solid. I'm actually trying to increase my monthly benefit in my anniversary month this year. So do not mistake an insurance agent with a financial advisor. You guys get these emails all the time, right? From people trying to sell you disability, or saying that they'll take you out to dinner, or you should listen to them to hear about the disability plans they have. Most of those people are financial advisors. They're not financial advisors, but they are financial salesmen trying to act like financial advisors, trying to sell you disability insurance. So be very careful with those emails you get from your workplace plan, because you want an unbiased broker to shop around for you at major companies. Somebody shouldn't be emailing you. You should be emailing them. It's with like anything in life. If somebody's emailing you, that's a problem. You should be going out and reaching out to them because they're an unbiased opinion. And I'll just leave this up for a second if you want to scan it, because this will take you to the White Coat Investors top disability groups that will shop around for you. All right. So how long do I need it for? Well, until you're financially independent, really, enough to cover all of your expenses in retirement. In addition to this, since most disability insurance policies only pay until age 65 or 67, the benefit becomes less and less over time. So you really don't need it that far along. And there's no point in paying for insurance premiums if you have the means to cover any disaster. So if you hit financial freedom at any point in your career, or you have a fund to pay for this, it's not really worth keeping up with this, and you can drop it at that point. So I plan to cancel in my 50s, and maybe sooner than that, I don't know, or just weigh it out. But this is not something usually people keep until their late 60s. So this is just an example of my policy here with Guardian, and I have an elimination period of 90 days. My benefit is $4,000 a month, and this is when I was single, and now being married and with Anna's income, we need to increase this. So I'm talking to the company, but I can't change it until June to increase this. But I have a total increase option up to $12,000 per month without underwriting it. So they'll just increase it, and without an increase in annual premium payment on it. Very much past what it is. It will go up, but not an exponential amount. There's also this basic partial disability benefit rider, which is that one we were talking about that covers you for that. You're almost back, but not 100%. 3% compound cost of living adjustment rider. So that's the one that covers for inflation. Serious illness supplemental benefit endorsement, that just came with it. An occupational rehab modification and access benefit endorsement. I think this just pays for occupational rehab for a short amount of time. But, excuse me, this is really the biggest benefit of doing this early. So you don't want to wait until you're older to do this, or later in your career, because you get a lot of discounts now. I got a student and resident discount, preferred occupation discount. Everyone sort of has this 24-month mental health and substance-related disorder discount, and select risk class discount. I don't even know what that was, but I got it. And that really led to some great benefits. You got to think about this too. The longer you wait, the more likely you are to get a pre-existing condition, the harder it becomes to get qualified. So I'm doing a graded premium, and as you can see here, every year it increases over time. The overall yearly premium, this is a plus the riders, and this is with the discounts. So if you were to hold this till you were 60, that's an annual premium with discounts of $3,347 a year, and those discounts are locked in for life. So that's why another benefit to get them now. But I'm also looking into maybe changing to level and seeing what that would look like, because if you also don't plan to hold it that long, you have to really weigh out, is it worth it getting into this range here of $1,000, $2,000 here. So tips, tricks, and pitfalls. Most companies will offer discounts to residents and fellows over attendings, as I mentioned. Another great reasons to get it early. Disability insurance is more expensive in certain states, and the price changes with states, so make sure to check before moving. Once you lock it in, you're locked in, but if you move to another state, you can get a higher premium than when you were in that first state to begin with. If you're thinking about getting pregnant, then try to get the policy before that. If you get it during your first and second trimester, they will do a rider for your third. If you get it in your third, they will exclude pregnancy completely. Yeah. That was a lot. Any questions on disability insurance? Pretty clear.
Yeah, I think so. I have a policy through Emeritus. I think mine is a lot more expensive than yours is, but yeah, I guess it is what it is. It falls within the 3 to 5% range for the benefit, but I think it's pretty expensive. But
yeah, I don't remember if I looked at Emeritus. I must have looked at all of them. Guardian, when I was doing it, had a great reputation, and I might have. They have two definitions. One is a more strict one, which is more expensive. I might have gone with a little less strict of a definition, but it's still true on occupation. So you might actually have a stronger overall definition of disability than me if you're paying more, which is good. That is something that, I think if it fits within your expenses per month, that's something that I wouldn't feel bad about, because in a catastrophe, you're going to be glad you had that. Do you have all those same riders?
I'm actually looking at it right now. Yes, I have the FIO and the guaranteed renewable and the specialty own occupation. I don't have the student loan rider or the automatic increase benefit rider.
The future increase option?
But I do have the future increase option.
Oh, you do? Perfect. You have all the right.
I can do it whenever I want, but it doesn't automatically do it.
Perfect. I think most companies, a big six, are going to get you all of these because they know that's what's right and correct. I think some other ones might try to sell you the junk ones, but if you go with the big ones, you're going to get everything you need. Well, awesome. And this is something too that you can always change and reassess. And it's pretty easy. I forgot even how to do it, and I emailed my Dr. Disability Quotes, the broker, the other day, and they just picked right up on it. So I'm going to finish off by talking about the Backdoor Roth IRA. I was going to talk about whole and term life insurance, but that'd be too much insurance talk, and I think that'd be boring. So I want to mix it up and just finish with back to a little bit of investing. So what is it? Well, it's not an account like a lot of people think. And it's a way to get money into your Roth IRA after you hit income limits of that Roth IRA. So if you guys remember that there is a Roth income limit of $6,000, $7,000 if you're age 50 or over, and you really hit that at these income limits. So if you're $140,000 as a single filer, you're phased out. $208,000 for a married couple, you're phased out. And the key to this is really to get more money into this after you've hit above that threshold, because once you become a high income earner, you're going to go above that threshold likely, especially single or married. So it's important to figure out how to get into the Roth category again, because the Roth is a powerful retirement account. Timing is important with the Backdoor Roth IRA. It must be, I should say, done from January 1st of the tax year until April 15th of the following year. And the conversion can happen at any time after the contribution. The best time to do both is the first week of January with a lump sum. So, important thing to understand is the pro rata rule. And what you do is you normally report a Roth conversion on IRS Form 8606. On this form, a calculation goes into effect called the pro rata rule, which states whatever amount you convert into this Roth account has to go over the total of all the money in your traditional rollover SEP IRA and simple IRA. The denominator must be 0 when you convert to make sure you do not owe taxes on the conversion. So the whole part of doing a successful Backdoor Roth IRA is you must have 0 in that account, or you're just going to be taxed on it. And the whole idea of a Backdoor Roth IRA is a quick transition from your traditional to your Roth that happens within a week or a couple of hours, that is completely legal in the tax code. Once you make over that income limit, you just quickly do that transfer. It counts as a Roth contribution, and you get tax 0 on it only if nothing is sitting already in your traditional rollover SEP or simple IRA. And if you have money in those accounts already, you need to think about how to get that out of there before you hit those high income years. So you can withdraw the money, but that's not usually recommended. Convert the entire sum to a Roth IRA, which is a taxable event. And we're not talking about the Backdoor Roth IRA here. We're talking about just converting from a traditional to a Roth before those high income years without doing this whole backdoor, because whenever you convert, you pay taxes on it. And you can do it in small amounts over a certain amount of time, but you have to calculate out what the tax hit is going to be on it. You can roll the money into a 401k, 403b, individual 401k. Those don't count in the pro rata calculation. And some physicians even open an individual 401k at Fidelity, E-Trade, or Vanguard to do this. So the way you do it is you contribute $6,000, which is the contribution in 2022, to a traditional IRA. And you can also do this for your spouse in a spousal IRA. Leave the money in cash. You don't invest it, because you don't want anything coming back into that account, and you want it to be 0 the second you transfer it out. A couple of days later, you can even do it within a couple of hours at a place like Vanguard that does it quickly. You immediately transfer it from a traditional to a Roth, and then you invest that $6K. And that's it. And that's how you were able to get your money into a Roth account over those income years. You just need to report it correctly on your 8606. And that can be challenging if you use TurboTax. If you have a tax person, it's a lot easier. They can make sure that you're doing it right, because this can lead to a lot of problems and a lot of screw ups if you fill out this form incorrectly. If you leave any money in a traditional SEP, simple, if you over contribute to a Roth and you didn't think you were in those over income years, you thought you could still contribute to a Roth, you could get screwed and have to do a recategorization. So this is a typical 8606 here. And what you do is in right here, line 1, you put the contribution amount, but line 2, you have to make sure is 0. That's the total basis in your traditional IRA. This just adds up line 1 and 2. Line 5, you subtract line 4 from line 3, and then you get 6,000 here. These should be 0. 8 here should be 6,000. 9 should be 6,000. 11 should be the same thing, and 13. And this because this is the non-taxable portion of all your distributions. And for some reason, you just have to do it again for 16 and 17, and that's it. And the most important lines are 2, 14, 15C, and 18 to make sure they say 0, or you're going to get a tax hit on it. There's something called the Mega Backdoor Roth IRA you guys have probably heard of. Not everywhere allows this, and it's the ultimate way to get a lot of money into Roth money. And what it really is it requires a 401k that accepts after-tax employee contributions and allows for either in-service withdrawals or conversions to a Roth. This seems confusing, but what this means is, let's say you have an account with Vanderbilt, and they have you have a Roth 401k, which we do, that allows employee contributions above 17,500 and above that to get to the max of 52,000. Half of it's from the employee, half of it's from the employer. Vanderbilt does not allow you to put in money after tax from your own checking account above that 17,500 that you can contribute. Some employers will allow you to put in extra of your own money above that 17,500 plus their contribution to get you to 52. But they also allow you to convert that money that you put in above that into a Roth IRA within the plan. So it's called a mega backdoor Roth because it's a after tax going, well, it can be a pre-tax if it's a 401k. So it can be pre-tax, then rolled into a IRA up to $52,000 because you can convert the entire amount at that point. But Vanderbilt doesn't allow for that. That's probably sounds really confusing, but only certain companies allow for this, where you can convert a 401k number or a Roth 401k like up to $52,000 into a Roth IRA, which is crazy, but Vanderbilt doesn't allow that. Changes in Congress, provisions in the Build Back Better bill are written to ban the backdoor IRA and all Roth IRA conversions. So this would also ban rolling over money and the backdoor Roth IRA. It's still in the works, but there's no changes to this yet. There's also this thing called the 5-year rule, which states that it's a great rule that you can roll over. Whenever you roll over money, 5 years later, you can take out Roth contributions tax-free and gains tax-free. And if you remember, normally, if you do a Roth conversion, a Roth contribution, you can take out tax-free always. If I put in 6,000, I can take that 6,000 out. But if that 6,000 grows, I'm taxed on the gains it has. But if you do a conversion, you can take out the gains 5 years later from that conversion date. It's actually usually January 1st. So sometimes it can be even better than the conversion date. And that was probably confusing in itself also. Any questions on that?
No.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it. Finished right about 8 o'clock. Probably next time talk about HSAs a little bit and maybe get into, these are smaller topics like tax loss harvesting and the Roth conversion ladder I just talked about there. The 5-year rule is the conversion ladder. So you convert, and in 5 years you can take everything out from that conversion date. Donor advised funds, real estate investing, active and passive. I don't think I'll be able to do this next month, but in April, I'm going to be talking to a group. I think it's like the Physician Moms group about passive real estate investing. So I might be able to do it twice, like do something for the group here and then there, or see if I can get a link to that.